When Sarah Hale stepped off the transport vehicle and onto the wide concrete of the naval base, the salty wind brushed against her face, carrying the distant sound of waves crashing against the docked ships. She took a slow breath, trying to clear her mind before walking forward. This was not her first time on a military base, but there was something different about being here again after so long. She carried only one small bag, and her uniform looked crisp and perfect, except for one thing. On her wrist, barely visible under the sleeve, was a faded tattoo. Most people would not notice it unless they looked closely, but Sarah already felt the eyes of curious sailors on her as she crossed the main gate. She walked with calm steps, not too fast, not too slow, simply following the officer who was assigned to escort her. The base was busy, filled with movement and noise. Trucks rolled by, sailors jogged in formation, and officers stood at different points giving instructions. It was a place full of discipline and energy, but even in all the noise, Sarah felt the whispers start when she passed a group of junior sailors. One of them nudged another, and their eyes fell directly on her wrist where the tattoo peeked out as she held her bag. "Did you see that?" A young sailor muttered, not quietly enough. "Yeah. Who comes to base with a tattoo like that? Looks like something from a street gang." Another whispered, snickering under his breath. Sarah heard every word. She didn't react. She had learned long ago that sometimes staying silent was more powerful than answering back. She kept walking, but a small knot tightened in her chest. Not because their words hurt, but because she already knew how this place worked. Judgments came fast. People drew conclusions before they even learned your name. She reminded herself that this was temporary. She had been sent here for a short assignment, nothing more. Still, the feeling of being misjudged was not new. As she continued walking, she noticed more eyes shifting her way. Some looked curious, some judgmental, and some simply confused. Her tattoo didn't match the usual polished image expected from an officer. Tattoos weren't forbidden, but the style and faded look of hers made it stand out. It was simple, almost too simple, just a symbol that looked old and unfamiliar to most. And because it wasn't common, it immediately became something people whispered about. Sarah walked into the main building for check-in. The petty officer at the front desk glanced at her ID, then at her wrist, lingering for a second before pretending not to stare. She had seen that look many times, the kind people gave when they didn't want to ask questions but wanted to judge anyway. "You'll be assigned to the operations wing for now," he said politely, though his eyes flickered down once more. "Thank you," Sarah replied calmly. As she made her way to the operations wing, she heard footsteps and chatter behind her. A small group of sailors had followed at a distance, laughing quietly. They were young, likely new recruits or low-ranking members, but their confidence in mocking others came easily. "Maybe she got that tattoo before she joined," one said. "Or maybe she thinks she's special," another joked. "Look at her. So serious." They laughed again, and Sarah kept walking, not letting her expression change. She had thick skin, but it wasn't always because she wanted it, it was because she needed it. She had been underestimated before, and she had learned that sometimes the loudest people were the ones who knew the least. Inside her assigned office area, a few senior officers glanced up when she entered. Most greeted her politely, welcoming her to the base, but even they couldn't help but notice the tattoo. Their expressions were less mocking and more curious, as if they recognized something but weren't sure. Sarah gave them a respectful greeting, placed her small bag near the desk she was assigned, and sat down. She took a moment to breathe. She didn't come here to impress anyone. She came because she was ordered to assist on a project and provide support where needed. Her goal was simple: do her job well, stay quiet, and leave when her assignment was over. But she could feel the weight of the whispers following her, even inside the building. Young sailors passing by the office door glanced inside and murmured to each other. The tattoo had become their whole opinion of her, without knowing anything about her skills, her history, or the truth behind that faded mark. She pulled her sleeve down slightly to cover it, not because she was ashamed, but because she was tired. Tired of explaining, tired of people assuming things, tired of old memories rising like ghosts whenever someone mentioned the tattoo. Still, despite the whispers, Sarah's posture remained straight, her expression calm. She knew something they didn't. She knew what that tattoo truly meant. She knew what she had survived to earn it. And she knew that someday, maybe very soon, someone on this base would recognize it. And when they did, everything would change. For now, she simply prepared to start her assignment, unaware that her quiet arrival would soon shake the entire base from the lowest enlisted ranks to the highest office. The rumors began spreading almost as soon as Sarah finished her check-in. Naval bases were big places, but news traveled fast, especially when it involved someone new, quiet, and slightly mysterious. All it took was a few curious eyes noticing her tattoo, a few whispers in the hallway, and suddenly half the junior crew had a story to share. Some sailors claimed she must have gotten the tattoo before joining the military, maybe during her college days or before she ever put on a uniform. They said it looked like one of those old street symbols people get when they're young and rebellious. Others came up with a different idea, a more insulting one. They said she must have gotten lucky with her assignment. According to them, there was no way an officer with a tattoo like that could have a serious or impressive record. The most common rumor was the simplest one. She's probably inexperienced. That line spread everywhere, through the cafeteria, in the hallways, near the sleeping quarters, even on the training field. And each time someone repeated it, they added a little more, as if they were the experts. Some said she didn't look tough enough. Some said she seemed too silent, too calm, like she had nothing important to say. The tattoo became the center of the gossip, like it defined her whole personality. Sarah, meanwhile, was sitting in her assigned office, reviewing documents for the project she had been called to assist with. She had always preferred quiet work, not because she was shy, but because she believed actions spoke louder than bragging. If she had wanted attention, she could have told people about her past. But she never liked showing off. She believed respect should come from real behavior, not from telling stories. The whispers reached her even through the thin office walls. She heard a group of 2 sailors passing by. "That's the one, right?" one said softly. "The tattoo officer?" "Yeah, that's her," the other replied. "I heard she messed up during training somewhere else. That's why she got sent here for some small assignment." "That makes sense," the first one said. "You can't trust these quiet types." They walked away laughing. Sarah kept her eyes on the papers in front of her, but her mind was somewhere else. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. This kind of thing happened often to people who carried scars, visible or invisible. People liked to assume things. It made them feel superior or safe. Judging others was easier than admitting they didn't know the full story. But Sarah didn't want respect handed to her. She wanted her work to show who she really was. Later that afternoon, she went to the cafeteria to grab a simple meal. She sat alone at a corner table, not because she wanted to hide, but because she liked observing. As she ate quietly, she noticed the looks again. A group of young sailors at the nearby table kept glancing at her wrist. They were trying to act subtle, but their voices carried easily across the room. "One tattoo and she thinks she's tough," one of them joked. "I bet she'll avoid every field drill," another laughed. "Probably doesn't even know how to handle half the real tasks. Maybe she joined for the benefits," one said. "Some people don't have the spirit for real military duty." Sarah took a slow sip of her water. None of what they said was true, but she didn't defend herself. Defending herself here would only feed the rumors. She had seen this pattern before. People liked believing their own stories, even if they were wrong. Still, even their laughter couldn't erase the fact that the tattoo meant something far deeper. It wasn't something she got on a fun weekend. It wasn't a mistake from her younger days. And it definitely wasn't a meaningless symbol. That tattoo was tied to a chapter in her life that she didn't speak about casually. A chapter that involved danger, sacrifice, and a unit that wasn't openly discussed. A unit very few people even knew existed. The mark was given to those who completed missions that never reached the newspapers. And Sarah was one of the few who carried it. But the sailors didn't know that. They only saw what they wanted to see. Later, while returning to her office, she noticed 2 petty officers standing near the door. They weren't mocking her like the younger sailors, but they were curious. "Did you see her wrist?" One of them whispered, "That tattoo looks familiar. Maybe from some old task force?" The other guessed. "But she's too young for that, right?" "I don't know," the first one said. "But something about her doesn't match these rumors." Their voices faded as they walked away. This time, Sarah felt something different. A small spark of hope. At least someone was questioning the rumors. At least someone noticed she carried herself differently than the stories people told about her. Still, the majority continued to gossip. And with every passing hour, the rumors twisted further. Some even said she had been disciplined at her previous base. Others said she was only good with desk work. Sarah knew these stories would spread no matter what she did. The more silent she remained, the more people would invent explanations for her quiet nature. But she wasn't here to prove herself to them. She knew her purpose, and she knew why she had been sent to this base. She only hoped that one day, maybe soon, someone with real authority would understand the truth behind her tattoo. Someone who actually recognized it. Because when that happened, everything on this base would shift. The whispers would stop. The mocking would turn into silence. And the truth would rise in a way no rumor could compete with. Over the next few days, something surprising began to happen on the naval base. Even though many junior sailors kept whispering about Sarah's tattoo and calling her names behind her back, the officers who worked close to her started noticing something different. Something the rumor spreaders completely missed. Sarah did not talk much, but she worked with a level of focus that was impossible to ignore. Every task she touched, she handled with quiet confidence. When she walked into a room, she didn't try to draw attention, but people naturally looked at her because she moved with the calmness of someone who had been through real pressure before. She didn't hesitate, didn't panic, didn't waste time. Her first assignment was to reorganize the medical supply storage, a job that many officers usually took lightly. But when she stepped inside the storage room, she quickly realized it was a mess. Boxes stacked wrong, expired medicines mixed with active ones, important equipment placed where no one could find them easily. Most officers avoided this task or did it slowly, but Sarah rolled up her sleeves and began sorting with practiced skill. By the end of the day, she had turned the chaotic room into a perfectly organized space. Everything was labeled clearly, arranged correctly, and recorded neatly in the system. A senior officer walked in and stared at the shelves in shock. "You did all this in one day?" he asked. Sarah simply nodded. "It needed to be fixed." The officer smiled, impressed. "You work fast." "I've had practice," she replied gently. But even then, she didn't mention where that practice came from. Word started spreading, not through gossip this time, but through real respect. Officers began saying things like, "She's efficient," and "She knows what she's doing." But the junior sailors who mocked her still didn't understand. They assumed she was trying to impress people with simple tasks. They didn't see the depth behind her quiet actions. A few days later, during a routine security drill, she noticed something that the others overlooked. A communication error in the drill's planning could cause confusion during the actual exercise. When she pointed it out, the officer in charge raised an eyebrow. "How did you catch that?" he asked. "Even I didn't notice it." Sarah explained the mistake calmly. The officer realized she was right and immediately corrected it. If she hadn't caught the error, the drill would have ended in wasted time and maybe even injuries. Slowly, her actions were starting to speak louder than the tattoo on her wrist. Still, many young sailors treated her as if she didn't belong. They laughed when she passed by, whispering things like, "There goes the tattoo officer," or "She acts like she's seen battle." Their voices were loud enough for her to hear, but she never responded. She never asked for respect. She never tried to defend herself. Some thought her silence meant she was weak. Others thought she didn't understand their jokes. In truth, she understood everything, but she chose not to waste time on people who judged without knowing. Meanwhile, the officers who worked closely with her grew more curious. Sarah didn't brag, didn't talk about her past, but every move she made showed experience. Deep experience. Her instincts were sharp. Her decision-making was fast. She walked in a way that reminded people of someone who had been trained not just by books, but by real situations. One afternoon, While assisting with a small crisis in the storage building, she lifted a heavy box from a shelf that most people struggled with. A petty officer watching her said, "You're stronger than you look." Sarah gave a small smile. Training builds strength. But what kind of training? He wondered silently. Even the way she observed things made officers pause. She noticed details others missed, like when she pointed out a missing fire extinguisher during an inspection, or when she calmly helped an officer correct a technical step in a report that could have caused confusion later. She did all this quietly without showing off. It was natural for her, like she had lived through far tougher days than anything happening on the base. The junior sailors began feeling something odd, confusion. They mocked her, yet she never reacted. They expected her to be clueless, but she kept proving she knew far more than they did. Her quiet confidence made them uncomfortable. It challenged their assumptions. One day in the cafeteria, a young sailor who had mocked her loudly before found himself sitting across from her accidentally. As soon as he recognized her, he stiffened. He expected her to glare or ignore him completely, or maybe complain about him to a superior. Instead, Sarah greeted him with a polite nod. The sailor was confused. Hi. She gave a small, calm smile. "How is your training going?" The sailor stumbled over his words. "Going fine, ma'am." She didn't judge him, didn't bring up the rumors, didn't make him uncomfortable. Somehow, her kindness made him feel even more embarrassed for mocking her. After he left, he thought to himself, why does she act so calm? What's her story? But Sarah didn't share her story with anyone. It remained locked inside her. Her past missions, her old unit, the dangers she faced, the people she saved, the things she survived. And that tattoo on her wrist, that was the only visible reminder of a part of her life she never planned to reveal. Not unless someone recognized it. Not unless someone who knew its meaning walked into the space. And that moment was coming much sooner than anyone expected. The day of the big training exercise arrived earlier than expected. Everyone on the base was busy preparing. Trucks moved equipment across the grounds. Officers checked clipboards, and sailors hurried from one place to another. The whole base buzzed with energy, like a giant machine warming up. Sarah had been assigned to the emergency response team for the exercise. It was a simple role on paper: respond if someone gets hurt, assist with coordination, and monitor safety. But Sarah took it seriously. She always did. While others treated these drills like routine events, she treated them as practice for real-life situations. She knew better than anyone how quickly things could go wrong. When she arrived at the training field, some junior sailors were already there. A few of them recognized her immediately and exchanged amused glances. "Oh look," one whispered. "The tattoo officer is here to save the day." Another snickered. "Hope she doesn't faint if someone sprains an ankle." They laughed, thinking she couldn't hear them. She did, but she didn't respond. She simply checked the medical kits, inspected the communication radios, and studied the field layout. Her mind worked quietly, preparing for anything unexpected. As the exercise started, sailors began moving through different stations, climbing walls, crawling under wires, carrying heavy equipment, simulating rescue operations. It was intense but organized. Officers watched closely, calling out instructions and timing each group. Sarah stood near the medical tent with two other responders. They had small tasks: treat fake injuries, assist with role play, and make sure everyone stayed hydrated. For the first 30 minutes, everything went smoothly. Then something changed. On the far end of the field, a loud crash echoed. People turned their heads. A sudden malfunction in one of the obstacle structures caused a metal bar to collapse. It didn't fall violently, but it hit hard enough to injure a trainee. He cried out, grabbing his shoulder as he fell to the ground. The young sailors nearby froze. Some panicked. Others shouted over one another. The instructor tried to calm everyone, but confusion spread. Before anyone else moved, Sarah sprinted. Her reaction was fast. Too fast for someone supposedly inexperienced, as the rumors said. She ran with sharp focus, weaving between obstacles and reaching the injured trainee within seconds. When she knelt beside him, her movements were smooth and professional. "What's your name?" she asked the trainee. Daniel Hart. He winced. Can you move your fingers? She asked. He nodded weakly. Good. Stay still. I'm going to support your arm. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice someone trusts instantly. She gently checked his shoulder, her hands moving with experience shaped by real emergencies. The other responders finally reached her, but even they paused, surprised at how quickly she had taken control. Radio for extraction, she instructed one of them, and inform the commander that the structure on Station 6 needs to be shut down. The responder nodded immediately. There was something about her tone that made it impossible to question her. As the injured trainee was carried away, Sarah stayed beside him, giving reassurance. She didn't look scared. She didn't even look stressed. She looked like someone who had done this many times before. Someone trained to remain calm when everyone else panicked. The junior sailors who had mocked her earlier stood frozen, their eyes wide. They had never seen her move so confidently. One whispered, "How did she get there so fast?" Another said, "She acted like she knew exactly what to do." Their confusion grew when the supervising officer approached her. "That was impressive," he said. "You reacted quicker than anyone on the field." Sarah nodded. He needed help. The officer studied her for a moment. Something about her calm expression bothered him, in a good way. It reminded him of experienced medics he had served with overseas. As the exercise continued, Sarah remained alert. She scanned the area constantly, spotting safety risks before others did. She warned one group about a loose rope, preventing another accident. She guided a confused trainee back to the correct station. She even fixed a faulty communication radio with quick hands, surprising the technician who had been struggling with it. By midday, everyone on the field knew who she was. At least, they knew she wasn't the weak person the rumors described. Her actions spoke louder than the jokes people whispered. During a short break, one of the sailors who had laughed at her tattoo earlier approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, you handled that really well," he said awkwardly. She gave a polite smile. "Thank you. It's part of the job." The sailor nodded and walked away, embarrassed. He didn't know what felt worse, being wrong about her, or realizing he had mocked a person so capable and calm. By the end of the exercise, Sarah's role had changed completely in the eyes of the officers. They saw her as reliable, sharp, prepared. Even the commanding officer made a note about her performance. But despite this, the true meaning of her tattoo remained hidden. The junior sailors still didn't know what it represented. They only knew she wasn't ordinary. They sensed there was more to her story, but they didn't understand just how deep it went. Not yet, because soon someone far more important than them would arrive. Someone who knew the tattoo better than anyone else on this base. And his arrival would change everything. The next morning felt different on the naval base. The air seemed heavier, the atmosphere quieter, almost as if everyone sensed something important was about to happen. Officers stood straighter than usual. Sailors moved with more discipline, and conversations were softer. Rumors spread quickly. A very high-ranking official was coming for an unexpected inspection. No one knew the full details, only that it was someone important. Someone whose arrival made even the strict officers nervous. Some sailors cleaned every corner of their stations. Others rushed to double-check reports, and a few simply tried not to look stressed. Inspections by high-ranking officials were rare, and they were never simple. Sarah didn't react the way others did. She continued her routine calmly, checking medical supplies and preparing her daily tasks. She didn't worry about inspections. She had faced far more unpredictable situations before. To her, a general's visit was just another day. But something inside her felt unusual. A quiet tug at her memory, a small hint of déjà vu. She ignored it at first, but it lingered like a whisper in her mind. Around noon, the base came to a sudden stop. A message echoed through the speakers, calling all officers to gather at the main parade ground. Sarah joined the others, standing at the side as sailors hurried into formation. The sun was bright, the air warm, and a strong silence filled the area. Then a black car arrived. A tall, commanding figure stepped out, wearing a uniform decorated with medals that shined in the light. His posture was powerful, his presence sharp, and his calm expression carried authority that made everyone instinctively straighten their backs. General Marcus Reed, one of the highest-ranking and most respected generals in the region. Whispers spread through the crowd like lightning. "That's General Reed. What's he doing here? I heard he's here to review our training programs. Everyone better behave perfectly." Sarah looked at him quietly. She hadn't seen him in years, but nothing about his presence had changed. The way he walked, the way he studied the base, the way he paused before speaking. She remembered it all. A small spark lit inside her, a memory she tried to bury but could never forget. General Reed greeted the commanding officer of the base with a firm handshake and began his inspection. He moved with silent confidence, observing everything closely, speaking only when necessary. Sailors followed him nervously, hoping to impress him or at least avoid mistakes. He asked questions, checked records, inspected equipment, and talked to officers about their tasks. His seriousness made everyone even more cautious. Then, as they passed the operations wing, Sarah stepped out of the building, carrying a small box of supplies. She didn't expect the general to be right there. She certainly didn't expect their paths to cross at that exact moment. At first, she didn't look up. She focused on carrying the box safely. But then she heard the footsteps stop. She felt a pair of eyes on her. Not just casual attention, but sharp recognition. Something told her to look. When she did, she froze for the smallest second. General Reed was staring at her. Not at her face. Not at her uniform, but at her wrist. Her sleeve had slipped slightly as she carried the box. The tattoo, the small faded symbol, was visible. The general's eyes widened, not in shock, but in recognition. A deep, unforgettable recognition. Silence fell around them. Officers watched, confused. Sailors stopped breathing for a moment, unsure what was happening. Everyone could tell something important was unfolding. General Reed took a slow step forward. "Lieutenant Hale?" he said softly, but his voice carried across the entire wing. The commanding officer blinked. "Sir, you know her?" Reed didn't answer him. His eyes stayed on Sarah. Sarah straightened her posture. Her voice was calm. "It's been a long time, sir." The junior sailors watching from the hallway exchanged wide-eyed looks. They had never seen her speak with this tone. Calm but powerful, like she suddenly belonged to a world far above them. Reed took another step closer. "Your tattoo," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd see that symbol again." Every sailor leaned forward slightly, trying to hear. Sarah lowered the box onto a table. "I kept it, sir. Some memories should not be erased." A strange silence settled over the area. The kind of silence that grows when no one understands what is happening. But everyone knows it's important. One brave young sailor whispered, "What does that tattoo mean?" Another hissed, "Shoo! The general is talking." But the general heard them anyway. He turned slowly, his voice deep and firm. "That tattoo," he said, "belongs to one of the most elite emergency strike units ever created. A unit so classified. Most people on this base have no idea it even existed." Gasps filled the hallway. Sarah remained standing quietly, her eyes steady, her expression unchanged. Reed looked back at her, and his stern face softened. Not with pity, but with respect. "You saved lives far beyond what these sailors can imagine," he said. "I didn't expect you to return to the field." The sailors who mocked her earlier felt their hearts drop into their stomachs. Their faces turned pale. Shame washed over them as they realized how wrong they had been. Sarah didn't boast. She didn't smile proudly. She simply nodded and said softly, "I go where I'm needed, sir." General Reed stepped back, raised his hand in a sharp salute. A salute filled with respect. "Ma'am," he said clearly, "welcome back." Every sailor in the hallway froze. A general, saluted her first. And in that single moment, every rumor shattered like glass. Part 6 begins with a mix of confusion and shock spreading across the naval base. Just minutes earlier, Maya had been treated like someone who didn't belong there. The young recruits had laughed at her tattoo, thinking it was some random ink that meant nothing. They saw her as an outsider, someone who might have walked onto the base by mistake. But once General Hart stepped in and welcomed her with respect, everything changed. Now people whispered her name as she walked past. No one dared laugh. No one even dared breathe loudly. Maya herself felt strange. She hadn't expected to return to the base after so many years. The memories of her past were heavy, and she carried them like extra weight on her back. Even though she stood straight and calm, inside she felt the emotions struggling. The tattoo on her arm, the same one they mocked earlier, had once been a symbol of courage and unity. Now it was like the doorway to her old life, a life she thought she had left behind. General Hart walked beside her, slow and steady, making sure she felt safe and respected. He was a tall, commanding man, but around her, his voice softened. It was obvious he knew her well, deeply well. The recruits followed behind, unsure whether to look at her or look away. They had been wrong, and the weight of that mistake sat heavily on their faces. As they moved through the hallway, Maya could feel their eyes on her, full of curiosity. She didn't want to make anyone feel embarrassed, but she also wasn't going to apologize for who she was. She had earned that tattoo, and she had earned her place here. Step by step, she felt her confidence return. General Hart finally guided her into a meeting room. The door closed softly behind them, and suddenly the noise of the hallway faded. The room smelled the same as years ago, like old wood, polished floors, and the faint scent of coffee. It made her stop for a second as memories hit her like a wave. She remembered standing in this very room, younger and unsure, asking to join a special rescue team. She remembered the long hours of training, the hardship, the losses, and the victories. This room was not just a place. It was a chapter of her life she had tried so hard to leave behind. General Hart watched her carefully. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her voice was still silent. Her heart was beating fast. She wasn't afraid. She just felt the power of the past returning. He walked to the table, opened a folder, and pushed it toward her. "You know why I called you back," he said. She looked at the folder without touching it. She already had an idea. Something serious was happening, something that required someone with her exact experience. The tattoo on her arm, the one the recruits mocked, was more than a mark. It represented a mission unit that had been disbanded after a dangerous operation. She had been one of the last members. And now, if they were calling her back, that meant one thing: trouble. She finally took a breath and spoke. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "Bad enough that we couldn't trust anyone else," the general replied. His answer made her chest tighten. She had promised herself she wouldn't return to that world. It had cost her too much: sleep, peace, even friendships. But she also knew something else about herself. If people were in danger, she couldn't walk away. General Hart continued, "I know you didn't plan to come back, but you were always the strongest we had. You carried your team when everyone else fell. And when we lost members, you kept going. You are the reason many of us are still alive." Maya lowered her eyes. She never liked talking about those days. She didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as someone who did what needed to be done, even when it hurt. A knock suddenly came from the door. It was one of the young recruits who had mocked her earlier. His face was full of embarrassment and regret. "Sir, I just wanted to apologize," he stammered. "We didn't know who she was." Maya looked at him, and instead of being angry, she gave a small, calm smile. "You shouldn't respect someone because of their past," she said softly. "Respect them because you don't know how hard their journey might have been." The boy nodded quickly, humbled. General Hart watched the moment with quiet approval. Then he turned back to Maya. "It's your choice," he said. "You can walk out now and no one will question it. Or you can help us again." Maya looked down at her tattoo, the mark of her old team. She traced the lines gently with her fingers. She had tried to escape her past, but maybe her past wasn't finished with her. Maybe this tattoo wasn't a reminder of pain. It was a reminder of purpose. When she finally looked up, her eyes were steady. "I'll help," she said. And with those simple words, her new chapter began. Part 7 begins with a different kind of silence, the kind that is full of tension and waiting. Maya had agreed to help, but she still didn't know every detail of the situation. All she knew was that something serious was happening, something that required the skills she thought she would never have to use again. As she sat in the meeting room with General Hart, she felt both strong and uncertain at the same time. She had made her choice, and now she needed to hear what exactly she was stepping back into. General Hart handed her the folder again, but this time she opened it. Inside were photos, maps, and reports. The pictures showed a group of missing naval officers, taken somewhere in a remote coastal region. The expressions on their faces were tight and frightened. Maya studied each photo carefully, remembering how to read even the smallest detail, body language, shadows, background clues. It all came back to her like she had never left. They were part of a mapping mission, General Hart explained. 2 days ago, their signals disappeared, and then we received a coded message, one that only your old unit knew how to recognize. Maya's heart tightened. The coded message was a distress signal created years ago by her own team. No other unit used it because it was built from their personal system, something they developed during a dangerous mission. Only a member of her team could have sent it. That meant someone from her past, someone she cared about, might be out there trapped or injured. She closed the folder slowly. "Who's leading the rescue team?" she asked. "You," General Hart said without hesitation. She blinked, surprised. "You want me to lead? After all these years?" "Not want," he corrected. "We need you to lead. No one else understands the old signals. And no one else can handle the kind of mission this is turning into." Maya felt a mix of fear and determination. She could feel her old instincts waking up inside her, like muscles stretching after a long sleep. She thought she had left this part of her behind, but now it felt like it had been waiting all along. A sudden knock came at the door again. This time, 3 officers walked in, 2 men and 1 woman. They all looked experienced, focused, and ready. General Hart introduced them as the people who would join her on the mission. They stood straight, showing her respect. They knew what the general's welcome meant. Anyone he greeted with such honor was someone important. The female officer stepped forward and handed Maya a small device. "This is the last signal we received," she said. "We cleaned the audio, but the voice is faint." When Maya pressed the button, a weak, shaky voice filled the room. She froze instantly. She knew that voice. Even after years, she could recognize it. It belonged to Liam, her closest teammate in the old rescue unit. The one who had always covered her back. The one she thought she had lost on their final mission. Hearing him made her breath catch. He sounded injured and scared. "May." The voice crackled. "Code 5, same place need." Then it cut off. The room became still. Maya's hands trembled slightly, but she hid it as best as she could. General Hart looked at her with gentle eyes. "This is why we called you." He trusted the signal only you would understand. Maya took a deep breath. She felt a heavy ache inside, mixing with fierce determination. Liam had once saved her life. Now it was her turn to save his. She stood up from the chair, and the officers straightened automatically, waiting for her orders. She didn't speak for a few seconds. She let her mind organize the plan, step by step. Years of training guided her thoughts. Finally, she said, "We leave in 1 hour." The officers nodded and exited the room quickly to prepare. General Hart stayed behind with her. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," she admitted. "But I will be." He smiled softly. "I knew you'd come back when the world needed you." Maya didn't answer. Instead, she looked at her tattoo. For the first time in years, she felt proud of it. Not because of how it looked, but because of what it meant. It wasn't just ink. It was a promise, a bond, a memory of people who never gave up. She stepped out of the meeting room and walked through the base with purpose. The young recruits who had laughed at her earlier saw her again, but this time they stood straight and silent. They could sense her strength now, her confidence, her command. They didn't know her full story, but they knew one thing clearly. She was someone their general respected deeply. That alone was enough to change the way they saw her. Maya reached the preparation area where gear was being loaded, and she immediately started checking weapons, communication devices, and survival tools. Her hands moved quickly, remembering old techniques. The officers watched her with admiration. She didn't need to prove anything. Her actions spoke louder than any introduction. As she packed her old knife, the one she had used during missions years ago, she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just returning to the base. She was returning to herself. The mission was dangerous. The terrain was harsh. And someone she cared about was waiting for her, counting on her. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She whispered softly, "Hold on, Liam. I'm coming." And with that, part 7 ends. Maya standing strong, ready, and fully awakened to the hero she truly is. Part 8 begins with the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the cold night air. Maya and her small team flew over dark waters and thick forests, heading toward the last known location of the missing officers. Everyone on board was silent, focused, and tense. But the silence inside Maya was different. It was heavy, filled with memories, hopes, and fear. Fear not for herself, but for Liam, the man who had once been the strongest part of her team. Below them, the rough coastline slowly appeared, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The pilot announced that they were close. Maya leaned forward, scanning the terrain. She remembered this area. It was the same place where her old unit had once been trapped during a dangerous mission years ago. That was the mission where Liam had saved her. And now, fate had brought her back to the same ground to save him. When the helicopter landed, the air was cold and sharp. The team moved quickly and quietly, following Maya as she guided them through the rocky area. Her instincts were sharp, like a compass pointing her to the right direction. Every step she took was confident. She was back in her element. After walking for almost an hour, they found the first clue. A broken communication device lay on the ground, the exact type used by the missing officers. Maya knelt beside it, touched it gently, and whispered, "He was here." Her voice was soft but full of determination. The team followed her deeper into the forest. The trees were tall, blocking the moonlight, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves under their boots. Maya kept checking the ground, the branches, the footprints. She could read the forest like a story. She pointed at a disturbed patch of dirt. "Someone crawled here," she said. "Maybe injured." Minutes later, they found a torn piece of fabric caught on a thorn bush. It was from a uniform. The same uniform Liam had been wearing in the photo. Her heart tightened, but she stayed strong. The team trusted her, and she couldn't let fear control her. They kept moving until they reached a narrow cave opening. Inside, they saw a faint flicker of light. Maya signaled for everyone to stay quiet and proceed carefully. The air in the cave was cold and damp, and the sound of dripping water echoed softly. As they moved deeper, Maya heard something, a weak, uneven breath. She stopped. Her heart almost stopped with her. It was him. She rushed forward, not with panic but with desperate hope. And finally, at the end of the cave, she saw him. Liam was lying against the wall, his leg injured, his face pale, but his eyes open. When he saw Maya, he blinked in disbelief, as if she were a dream. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, unable to speak. Then Liam whispered with a tired smile, "I knew you'd come." Maya kneeled next to him, gently supporting his head. "I got your message," she said softly. "I'm here now." He tried to laugh a little, even though it hurt. "You always find me." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. She examined his injury quickly. His leg was badly cut, but he was alive. That was all that mattered. The team moved in to help. They bandaged Liam, checked his vitals, and prepared him for evacuation. But before leaving, Maya took his hand for a moment. "Why did you send that old code?" she asked quietly. Liam looked at her, his eyes tired but still holding that old spark. "Because I knew. Only you would understand it," he whispered. "Only you would come." Those words hit her heart deeply. She didn't respond with words. She didn't need to. He already knew. The team carried him out of the cave carefully. As they stepped back into the open air, Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. The mission wasn't over yet, but the hardest part was done. Liam was alive. Back at the landing zone, they secured him inside the helicopter. Before closing the door, Liam caught Maya's hand again. "Thank you," he whispered. Maya gave him a small, warm smile. "Rest. We're going home." When the helicopter finally lifted off, Maya looked out the window at the coastline disappearing below. She felt tired, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. She had faced her past and protected the people she loved. She had proved, not to others but to herself, that she was still strong, still capable, still the warrior she had once been. When they reached the naval base, the recruits who had mocked her earlier were waiting. But now their faces were full of respect. They watched silently as she walked beside the medics carrying Liam. No one laughed. No one dared. They understood now why the general had called her ma'am. General Hart met her at the entrance. His eyes showed relief. "You did it," he said proudly. Maya nodded softly. "I just brought them back." He smiled. "That's why you were always the best." As Liam was rushed to the medical wing, Maya looked at the tattoo on her arm. The same tattoo they had mocked. The same tattoo that had brought her back. It wasn't just a symbol of the past anymore. It was a symbol of who she truly was. A protector, a fighter, and someone whose story was far from over.